Hi there, Steve Kaufman here, the Linguist on Language. Today I want to talk about teaching credentials, particularly language teaching credentials. We have TESOL, Teaching English as a Second Language, and other credentials that many people study for and acquire. And these are very useful in terms of getting jobs as teachers. But my interest is, how important is it from the perspective of the learner? How important is the teacher's credential in determining whether the teacher is effective? My belief is that the teacher's credentials are not important at all. However, it's certainly the case that the teachers place great value on these credentials, and whenever the results of teaching, for example, language teaching, say in the case of immigrant language teaching in Canada, I was speaking to the government department in the immigration department that looks after teaching of immigrants, and they were saying that they aren't having much success, and one of the things they're going to do is raise the credential standards and more money on training and so forth. And this is inevitably what teachers like to do. They would like to see more money spent on training, more money spent on creating more jobs. But from the perspective of the learner, I don't think the credentials matter at all. And I was reading a book on my Kindle called Liberating Learning: Technology, Politics, and the Future of American Education, written by two academics, Terry Moe, M-O-E, and John Chubb. And one of the interesting comments in there was that a variety of different research has shown that credentials have very little bearing on the results in education generally, and I'm sure language education is no exception. What seems to matter the most is the verbal ability of a teacher, the ability of the teacher to speak well in an interesting way, engage the students. That's the number one thing. The second thing is the competence that the teacher has in the subject. And the third thing is the experience of the teacher. So if we apply that to language teaching, obviously the ability to speak the native language is extremely important. And even if it's a non-native speaker, the ability to speak the language is extremely important. The second thing is the competence. And here I think we're talking about an ability to speak the language well, and second of all, as a language teacher, the experience of having learned one or more foreign languages. And third of all, so far as experience, here again, it's the experience of teaching, which I think is extremely important, more important than any credentials. And second of all, again, the experience of having learned a language. So I think all of these things are more important. Now, is the teacher important, period? Well, I think that the teacher can be extremely important. Even in my own case, even though I am very much an independent learner, and I think people should be independent learners, and the best language learners are independent learners, somewhere somebody has to turn that switch on. Now, for some lucky people, they just, as youngsters, get very interested in other cultures and other languages, but most people are at some point influenced by someone else. That someone else can be a teacher. And in my own case, at the age of 17 at McGill University, it was a French professor who turned me on to French culture and the French language. And that made me an independent learner, initially of French and then of other languages. So I think the teacher can be a tremendous influence. The teacher is an influence in terms of motivating the learner. And so there we get to the sort of verbal skills, communication skills of the teacher, competence and therefore confidence in teaching the language, and of course experience as a teacher and as a learner. All of these things make it more likely that that teacher will be a positive influence on the learner, turn on the learner. Credentials, learning how to theoretically how one should teach modal verbs and when, I mean, that's, to my mind, irrelevant. There are textbooks. You can either follow the textbook or not follow the textbook. It's my experience that any textbook I have seen that seeks to teach certain parts of speech in certain order and expects the learner to learn them are doomed to failure anyway, because the learner is going to learn them on their own timetable. And as I've said before, learn primarily through massive input. I mean, we've built the link system around the idea that if you listen a lot, if you read a lot, if you save and review a lot of words and phrases, you will gradually get used to the language. And you can, at your own speed, review some grammar points in a small book, Googling on the internet, or in a grammar class. It doesn't really matter. But it's not crucial. It's not essential to your learning of the language. And what the teachers tend to do, they reinforce one of the most unfortunate habits and attitudes of learners, and that is the feeling that they have to nail things down. They have to learn it. Chapter 1, I have to learn chapter 1 for my teacher, for my test. I have to learn chapter 2. If I can't remember the words, if I can't remember the grammar, then there's something wrong with me. It's pressure. It's all of that is very unpleasant, and it comes from the teachers, and that's what they're taught to do in terms of getting their certificates. I should say I've never been to one of those courses, but I assume that that's what they are taught to do, because that's what they do when you go to their classes. So, in summary then, I think that credentials are not important. I think there's a very unhealthy insistence on credentials throughout the education system. I think that the analysis and basically the conclusion of these two authors, Chubb and Moe, based on research, that it's more a matter of verbal ability to communicate, competence in the subject, and of course personality plus some experience. These are the things that make successful teachers. Successful teachers turn on learners. They don't insist that learners do this for this test, learn these chapters because I taught it this semester, all of those kinds of things. And many of the explanations that I get from the experienced credentialed teachers are unwelcome. I don't want them. What I want is an engaging person that's going to turn me onto the language. So, not surprisingly, I'm not a fan of credentials, and I think credentials are only one part of the sort of rigid structure of language education, which is the reason why so many people are turned off language learning. So, I look forward to your comments. Thank you.